Right, well, blow me down. This is the third time I've had to record this. The first time, no sound. The second time, other audio problems. But anyway, here I am, and I'm finally, this time, going to hit the nail on the head. So I believe I referred to it in a previous video, pounds, shillings, and pence. Now, this was the currency that we had, the currency structure that we had in the 50s and 60s when I was growing up. It's very confusing to foreigners, Europeans, and Americans who had decimal currency for a long time before, and I think they could thank Napoleon for that. But we had pounds, shillings, and pence, which were much more ancient structure, actually. They had pennies, which were copper coins, shillings, which was silver currency, and pounds, which at one time had been gold. And there were 12 pennies in a shilling. There were 20 shillings in a pound, and that was how it worked. Now, pennies were useful copper coins. I mean, they had some spending value. You could pay a bus fare or buy a packet of chips or something. But you used to go into a fish and chip shop and have 4 penneth of chips, and they'd put a scoop of chips on a sheet of newspaper and wrap it up for you and make a nice little snack after the pub. Uh, they used to use newspaper in those days. It wouldn't be sanitary enough now, but then they used to say, "Today's news is tomorrow's chip paper," and it was literally true. Of course, they hadn't invented the internet in those days, so the idea was that what was sensational now would be forgotten tomorrow. But now, of course, you put something on the internet, it's up there forever. So times change. Anyway, in the 50s and 60s, there were pennies. There were half pennies as well, and I think I just about remember farthings, which were quarter of a penny. Some poor kid came to school. We had a little tuck shop in my primary school, and he brought 4 farthings, which made a penny, and he wanted to buy a packet of crisps for his break snack. And the nuns, the mean-hearted women that they were, wouldn't sell it to him. He burst into tears, and they relented, and he got his packet of crisps. Another thing penny was useful for, if you went to a public toilet, a sit-down public toilet, you had to put a penny in the slot to open the door, and spending a penny became synonymous, a euphemism for going to the toilet. People used to say, "I'm going to spend a penny." That's what they meant. Uh, and copper coins were real copper, and of course, when they went out of circulation, they were worth more as actual copper than they were as money. Anyway, the next thing's silver. Silver. You had an intermediate coin, which was a threepenny bit, which was a sort of brassy, bronzy colour, and it was looked like and probably had about the same spending power as a modern day pound coin. Uh, and that, above that, you had the silver coins, the shilling or bob, as we called it, which was 12 pennies. There was a half shilling, which was 6 pence. We called it a tanner, and there was still a few silver 3 penny pieces, People kept them for souvenirs mainly. They weren't in circulation. Then there was a two bob bit or 2 shilling coin, which used to be called also a florin, but that never really caught on. The idea was, I think it was an original attempt to decimalize the currency because there were 10 florins in a pound. And above that, there was a two and six, or two and a kick, as we used to call it. And we also used to call it half a dollar or half a crown. A crown was a coin which still existed, but was really used for commemorative purposes. And I guess at one time it was roughly equivalent to the value of an American dollar. So 2 and 6 we used to refer to as half a dollar. Yeah, this is a crown. Yeah, and that crown was given to me when I was born because it's dated 1951. And they didn't strike that coin just to commemorate my birth, but it it was the year that George VI died, and his daughter Queen Elizabeth became queen. 1951. She reigned for 70 years, nearly all of my lifetime. Oh, and like I say, it was similar in size to a silver dollar. This is a silver dollar. 1922 it's dated. It says, it's got liberty on it, and it says, in e pluribus unum, which I think many as becomes the one, or many is one in the nation, United States. It also says on it, in God we trust. Now, my partner, who is American, when she was at school in the 60s, like every school kid, probably then and now, at the beginning of the school day, had to pledge allegiance to the flag and the United States. And then in the 50s, somebody came up with the idea of adding in one nation under God, adding in the God bit. And my partner stood up in class when they started that and said, well, we don't believe in God in my family. Of course, it was a sharp intake of breath. Everybody was shocked and stunned. An atheist. She still doesn't believe in God, but fortunately, she believes in people, so it doesn't really matter. Anyway, that was silver coin. Oh, silver coins, of course, they used to have a kind of beveled edge, a milled edge. And the idea was that at one time coins used to be just have a smooth edge, but everyone everyone whose hand that coin passed through used to trim a little bit of silver off it, collect it somewhere in a box, save it up. And the idea of a milled edge was that it stopped that. Anyway, the next thing was a pound. Now, when I in the 50s and 60s, pounds were all paper money. They had 10-shilling notes, which were brown, pound notes, which were green, £5 notes, which were blue. Before the war, they had what they called white fivers, which were huge notes. They were about half the size of an A4 sheet of paper. But they went out of style. I guess that's devaluation for you. And anyway, I think there were £10 coins, £10 notes as well. They were, well, I never saw one. I mean, the average working man's wage at that time was probably about £5. So £10 was rich people's money. Now there were still gold coins. There were still nominally pound coins. They were called sovereigns, and there were half sovereigns, quarter sovereigns. But because they were made of solid gold, they were much too valuable to use as currency. People used to keep them as a store of wealth, and they were marginally uh, better than bullion, bricks of bullion, little lumps of gold, because being coins, they weren't subject to capital gains tax. And if the price of gold went up, you didn't pay tax when you sold these coins. Um, oh yeah, there was one other denomination that was a guinea. Guinea, there might have been a coin at one time for a guinea, uh, but it wasn't used for that. It was primarily used in auctions, uh, goods that were sold at auction, like livestock or racehorses or works of art, things like that. And the idea of a guinea was that it was a pound and shilling, 21 shillings. And if you bought something, if you paid 100 guineas for it, the seller would get £100, and the auctioneer, the person who brokered the deal, would get the shilling, 100 shillings. So that was currency. Oh, oh yeah, I forgot to mention. I've got debasing the currency, trimming, clipping coins was highly illegal. It's almost treasonous. It was it was the king's, the queen's currency, and you weren't supposed to debase it. Uh, yeah, pound sterling pence. This seemed like a complicated system, but of course, if you grew up with it, it was second nature, and you quickly adjusted. And also, it meshed in with our also arcane weights and measures system. There were 16 ounces in a pound weight, or there were 12 inches in a foot. But of course, these numbers make sense. They're highly divisible. I mean, 20, for example, is 4 by 5, which is an ideal way to pack a little parcel or stack things, 4 and 5. Or the eggs today are still sold in boxes of 6. It's a nice little box. 2 eggs one way, 3 the other, 2 by 3. So it's a nice shape. There was the baker's dozen, of course. If you went into a baker's and bought a dozen rolls, you actually got 13. There was lobbed in an extra one just to make sure that they were making the weight. Hands. Measurements were ancient. They were an ancient thing, and of course they corresponded. They were based on things for measurements of the human body, like the space between the joints of your finger. For an average man's finger would be an inch. A foot, there were 12 inches in a foot. A foot, of course, spoke for itself. People had bigger feet in those days. And a yard, which was 3 feet, represented the distance an average man might take in a step. Oh, and horses. Even today, I think horses are measured in hands, and a hand is roughly the width of, an average man's hand, 5 inches or something. And a horse would be, so might be 15 hands tall, which would measure 15 hands breadths from the ground up to its withers, which is the kind of lump behind at the back of its neck. So, for foreign people and the younger generation who don't know these things, that was pounds, shillings, and pence. And hey, see you later. Oh yes, I forgot to mention this crown that I showed you earlier. There's a story attached to that. I I was very proud of it, of course, and my parents gave it to me when I was about 12, I guess. I was old enough to look after it. It had been there, but they kept it for me. And of course, I was very proud of it, and I took it to school to show off. And I pulled it out and showed everyone, and a little crowd of people gathered around. It was interesting. And there was one kid particularly, he said, "Oh, God, show me, let me have a look, give it to you. I want to hold it." I kept saying, no, 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 but he persisted, and in the end, I let him have it. I gave it to him. First thing he did with it was drop it on the concrete and put a little dent in it. Even then, ruined it as a collectible coin. Not that I was ever going to collect it, but I learned a valuable lesson that day. Never, never give anyone your money. Hey, and anyway, I just thought I'd add that.